Hi, thank you for having me here today. So my name is Daisy Chung. I'm the director of the New York Healthy Nail Salons Coalition. And, really excited to be here, on this panel, and as we're talking about health and safety in the beauty industry, I really am excited to share our coalition's experience organizing workers in the nail salon industry. I know that Charlene Obernaer was on a panel earlier today, so I won't go through, a summary of the coalition. I will say that, the central idea of why this coalition was formed was that, the idea that nail salon workers deserve just jobs. And, that means healthy workplaces with living wages and a voice in their working conditions. And I think Charlene had mentioned some of the successes that we've had, organizing, and, we've been able to pass the Nail Salon Workers Bill of Rights and to eliminate the tipped sub-minimum wage for nail salon workers. So, just getting back to, the kind of this really critical aspect of our coalition's purpose, which is organizing workers and working with workers to make change in the industry. We really believe that workers have the power to transform their workplaces and their entire sector if they work collectively to do that. We're really, rooted in our belief that we will not and cannot change this industry without worker participation and leadership. I'll talk a little bit about the labor organizing that's been happening, in particular in the New York nail salon industry. I can only speak from that context. It really has some unique challenges and opportunities. So I'll speak about those today. One, is really looking at, the layout and, structure of this industry. Like one, and you'll see in this, will do. One, if you just take a look at this slide, you'll see, this was a recent study that was done on the New York nail salon industry that was released a couple of months ago. But I think one key kind of structural, like unique challenge and opportunity is this is a highly disaggregated and atomized industry. Right, so there are almost 4,000 nail salons in New York, and these are thousands of independently owned small businesses without any big employers like in other industries, right? Like say an Amazon or a Walmart or a McDonald's, right? That just doesn't exist in the New York nail salon industry. And so no single employer has much influence over standards or any other kind of behaviors in the sector. And so the disaggregated nature of this industry is also coupled with the fact that an overwhelming majority of establishments employ a very small number of workers, right? So 82% of nail salons in New York have 5 or fewer employees. Kind of a second kind of unique structure of this industry is that it's facing, really sector-wide problems. And this is not just an issue of like, oh, a few folks are, doing these bad things, right? So for example, and this is really unfortunate, but we did a study a couple of years ago, and what we found is that 80% of the workforce, like 80% of the workforce is experiencing some form of wage theft. That is a very significant, number of workers who are impacted by that practice. And, really it's entrapped in this like industry norm in New York that in order to survive and compete, nail salons have to cut corners on labor and safety standards. And I'll explain a little bit about why that's happening. And then, I think you kind of look at that, right, in terms of like cutting corners on labor and safety standards. You also look at like, just given the very atomized structure of the industry and the very high levels of non-compliance with existing standards, we've really found that, enforcement actions, right, by like government agencies, like really have very little consequence or effect in actually changing industry behavior as a whole. And also, ineffective when it's such a, when there are very like sector-wide, widespread problems, right? Because we know that governments have limited resources and capacity. And then, another kind of unique, part of this industry is that it is overwhelmingly immigrant women of color in the workforce, specifically API and Latinx workers are just pretty much the workforce in New York. And, they are facing, multiple barriers to organizing, right? This is language, language and access, culturally inappropriate organizing approaches, and, societal gender roles that are really preventing folks from engaging. And these conditions are present alongside racial and ethnic stratification and discrimination in the workplace. And then finally, I think going back to, why, nail salons feel that they have to cut corners around labor and health and safety standards is that, this is a, we very readily acknowledge just the difficult environment for business success in this industry, right? There's thin profit margins. And in New York, low prices are really threatening the sustainability and long-term health of this industry. The average price of a manicure in the New York City metro area is $13.71, whereas the minimum wage, I know that Charlene had mentioned, right, is now $15 an hour, in addition to very high operating costs. For folks who, are from New York or from New York City or know about the area, right? Like operating a business is very costly. And so, you take a look at, what are the prices that are being, charged for services, and then you look at, what it takes to operate a business, the math doesn't add up. And so, there is, we're really, seeing a real need for some form of regulatory mechanism that levels the playing field across the industry, right? So a lot of, nail salon employers will say, owners will say, well, I can't charge more because the person down the street is gonna undercut me and I'm gonna go out of business, right? Folks are gonna go to that nail salon and not to mine. And so, there's a lot of that, very intense competition. And, it's been a real race to the bottom as folks are trying to offer the lowest possible prices. And this, comes at a detrimental cost to both workers and owners as well. And so, we really given these kind of this landscape, we really thought about like, what's it going to take, right? And what does labor organizing in this industry look like? And, we really go by certain principles, that really reflect the reality of the sector and how it operates. And so first is we want to raise the floor on labor standards and practices through a sector-wide approach, not a shop-by-shop approach, but it has to be, right? Change must happen at the industry level so that comprehensive standards apply across the board in all salons. And what we have seen is that not only must we have all the standards apply across the board, but we can't really function through piecemeal policy efforts, right? They have very limited reach and impact to benefit workers who are experiencing a range of interconnected issues, right? Like wage theft is not separate from health and safety, right? And these are all issues from, from lack of breaks, right? These are all very interconnected issues. And then we're really trying to take wages and working conditions out of competition, right? And ensure that employers who want to take the high road are not negatively impacted. And then we also, our other principle is that we need democratic and participatory approach to change making, right? So again, organized workers are instrumental to making change in this industry. And then we also believe that there is a place for workers and owners to participate in that kind of change-making approach, right? Both democratic and participatory. And then finally, we really see labor rights in the industry as directly interrelated with the well-being of our communities, rather than a strictly adversarial employer versus worker relationship, right? You can't have thriving and sustainable communities when the labor rights of our community members are being violated, right? So I think that's, fundamental one, right? And we have to acknowledge that there's fluidity in identities in the industry. Many times workers turn into owners, and then owners close up shop and become owners again, right? It's not a static identity. And then we also, want to be clear that nail salon ownership is one of the few opportunities for economic mobility in many immigrant communities, particularly for immigrant women. But, for us, the question is not how do we preserve it, but how do we support change in the sector so it benefits everyone. And then finally, not seeing labor rights as fundamentally anti-employer, right? Someone's rights, right, in and of itself is not fundamentally anti-someone else, right? These are your human rights, and doesn't necessarily have to involve this kind of adversarial approach. And so given kind of this organizing framework, we introduced earlier this year the Nail Salon Minimum Standards Council Act. And I'm sorry I haven't been going through the slides, but it'll be slide 7. And what this bill would do would create a permanent industry council at the state level, and it would be composed of nail salon workers, nail salon owners, and public representatives who will work together to recommend sector-wide minimum standards for the industry. And then finally, around this pricing factor that I mentioned before, right, where there's this real race to the cutthroat race to the bottom on pricing, the bill would establish an independent committee that would look at a fair minimum pricing model for the entire industry in the state. So we're really, pushing for this bill. We really believe that, if this passes, we'll build a new foundation for the entire industry. We're really creating labor policy with both workers and owners together at the table. We're going to empower those experts, right, workers and owners, to really think about, hey, what works for our industry? What do we need out of this? And then fair pricing that will really help regulate and reverse that race to the bottom around pricing. But yeah, those are the things that we're working on. And, we're hoping that there'll be a range of issues that folks will bring up on this council, from wages to health and safety, to scheduling, a lot of interrelated issues. Thank you, everybody.